But when you also look at the fact that a lot of people get their news from late night talk show hosts or from daytime talk shows, that's not news. That's punditry, usually from one side, and that is a problem.
Talking about how we have a right to protest. What we have is the right to peaceably assemble. That is the word that's used in the Constitution, peaceably assemble. As a talk show host, I've been accused over the years so many times. When I hang up on a caller, or I don't respond to an email, or I don't read a text on the air, I'm told I'm violating their First Amendment rights. But the reality is, only the government can violate your First Amendment rights.
There was a few really sad Bills fans, but the rest of us were like this. And I looked at Mandy and I said, I have no idea who's a Democrat here, who's a Republican, who believes this, who believes that. It doesn't matter, because this is what it means to have a society and have things that unite us. Hello, thanks for joining us. This is my friend Mandy.
This is my friend Deb.
And
together we are Mandy and Deb.
That has only taken us how many months?
You know what? I feel like we've nailed it every single time.
We do.
We're total pros.
But we don't high five on camera. It's an unfortunate looking thing.
We had an experience at the Broncos game where we tried to high five and it didn't go well.
Someone almost got hit. It was not good. But anyway, back to the show, because that's why we're here. We hope that you subscribe right below. Please subscribe to all the shows on IITV. There's a lot of great programs, and also follow us on Facebook at
Mandy and Deb, and that's an ampersand, fancy ampersand,
Super
and Deb
fancy, yes.
on Facebook.
There you go. And as you may know by now, we always start off because guess what? We've got issues.
Yes, we do.
We do have issues, and I get to do the clicky thing. Yay, it worked. Okay, as we talk about We've Got Issues, we thought we'd kick off the start of the year, because the beginning of the year, there's always, a talk of the state of the state of the nation. And we want to talk about the state of Colorado, but even more so the state of Coloradans. And Governor Polis just had a state of the state. I think his picture was a little bit more rosy than the statistics will say.
I was curious as to which state he was actually talking about.
I don't think it was this one, where we are now 40th or 50th in housing affordability, 6th in actual regulations over businesses, going in the wrong direction. But that wasn't what he was sharing.
He was actually sharing some kind of good news, I guess, but he painted it in such a way as to take credit for some of the things that are going really well that are more about actual Coloradans and less about government. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it sure does. Go Coloradans.
Yeah,
you did well.
There you go. No, the reality is that here in Colorado, we do have an affordability problem, but what does that mean to you? What does that mean to you? What's affordable for me may not be affordable for you, right? So that word is kind of too big in a sense for us to have any really substantial conversation. So let's break it down. Here are the things that people are concerned about, not just according to polling data, which is there, but also according to my neighbors and my friends. Young people in the state feel like they cannot get ahead. And you've got two young, I say young kids, they're young adults.
Yes.
They're at the beginning of sort of their adulthood. My middle son actually left Colorado because he didn't believe that he could get ahead. And it's mostly about housing affordability.
It is. And when you look at it, it's interesting, because the hope is that this year, going into a big election year, people will begin to understand what is national policy and what is state policy, because there's a lot of states around the country that are actually really improving. I mean, we've seen gas prices go down. We've seen different things change. Interest rates go down, inflation going down. But that's a national thing. When we look at Colorado, and truly we are either 40th or 50th, depending on how you do the marker, in housing affordability, meaning we are at the very, very bottom. And why is that? Yes, we have people moving in, but that's not really the issue. The issue is we actually have more people leaving than coming in. But when you look at the very fact that there are so many regulations now, and you talk to anybody in the home building business, it costs an extraordinary amount more here in Colorado to build a home than it does in other states. And so when you look at it, we need to break it down in that way. Food's gone down in certain instances, but energy is really expensive in Colorado.
Well, the gas prices here are really, really good. And they're really, really good
Yes.
because we both create oil, or not create it, we pull it out of the ground. And we also have the Suncor refinery,
Yes.
a little bit north of Denver. So we are refining gas here. We just drove to Ohio. And I got to tell you, I was like, dang, Colorado, we're doing pretty good on our gas prices right now.
Yes.
But that being said, I really wish that people would start to pay deep, deep attention to things that are coming down the pike. You know, here on IITV's YouTube channel, you can watch Power Gab, which is a phenomenal show about electricity generation, about power, about oil and gas, about nuclear. They talk about everything energy. And when you see some of the things that are happening, I found that part of the governor's speech really stuck in my craw. Here's what's stuck in my craw about it. This governor has overseen an attack on energy production in Colorado like we have never seen before. This governor has not only proposed, but supported and appointed people to the Public Utilities Commission that also believed that we need to be entirely on green energy, which is just not feasible.
It's not.
This week, Chancellor Merz from Germany, who has gone all in on green energy, more than any other developed nation in the world that I'm aware of, and it has destroyed their economy. They have the most expensive energy prices in the world almost, all because they decided to blow up nuclear power plants, blow up reliable energy, and move to green energy. He this week said today that their transition was the biggest mistake ever, and that it was the most expensive energy transition in the history of the world. He today actually said, hey, you know what? Europe has been squandering so much potential and growth because we are overregulated and we are focusing on the wrong things. You've got to pay attention to what's coming. This legislative session, I don't know if there's any oil and gas in this legislative session. I realize it's boring. But if you want to stay and be a part of Colorado, these things are going to be a huge part of how much it costs to live here going forward.
Yeah, and it's not boring when you're up in the middle of the night trying to pay bills and figuring out why, you're still making the same amount, but you cannot pay both your gas bill and your energy bill and your electric bill and whatever else you're trying to do. And it's a very real thing. I mean, when we look to Europe, they are oftentimes way ahead of us when it comes to some of these more progressive policies, and they're pulling back from them. They have the energy poor, people who are working overtime and can't even afford to heat their own homes. We don't want to go there. We don't have to go there. And particularly, growing up in Colorado, I care deeply about the fact that we want the air to be clean. We all do. We want to see the mountains, not through a haze, but actually see them, and because they're beautiful. But we've done that by helping oil and gas industry themselves renovate and innovate and all of that. And it's much cleaner than anywhere else. So it is important to see. The other reason why it's important, because we're going to talk about the state of Coloradans, not just Colorado, is we're at a point now where when you look at maps, sometimes they have red and they have blue. Well, there's a whole new category, and that's yellow. That's what Ballotpedia has on it. And the yellow states, or gold states, I like to think gold because I still love Colorado better than yellow, are ones where they're predominantly unaffiliated or independent. And why do I bring this up in transition? Because the number one issue also with independent voters in Colorado is affordability, and it's helping connect those dots. But I want to talk more about this change in Colorado itself, because when you get, your driver's license in Colorado, you're automatically signed up to vote. And you're automatically signed up as unaffiliated. Now, unaffiliated people like to be called independent, which I understand why. And we found out it's not. There's a recent study by Let Colorado Vote that shows unaffiliated or independent voters are not just that way because they were too lazy to change it from the driver's license. 86% of them choose to be unaffiliated, and for some very good reasons. One of the number one ones, they believe both parties are too extreme and too strident, and they think that Colorado is going in the wrong direction. So I just think it's an interesting thing that we need to think about when we look at Colorado today.
I'd like to think that unaffiliated voters, I'm an unaffiliated voter. I left the Republican Party in a fit of pique after some leadership choices were made, but I disagree that. I've remained an unaffiliated voter, mostly because I don't necessarily think in our state right now either party necessarily represents me. So I get it. I understand that. I think most people, and these are the people that I talk to, and they're not necessarily partisan. They're not even politically engaged or involved. They just want to be left alone to, have a house and be in a relationship. And if they're going to have kids, raise their kids, and they don't want to have to pay too much for the state. And the money that they do pay, they want to feel like they're getting an ROI, right?
Yeah.
You want to feel like you're getting a return on investment. The second thing that people list in Colorado as being an issue is public safety. And this is a huge thing. I mean, an absolutely huge thing. And you can say, well, because it's so expensive, that's why we have a homeless problem. Because it's so expensive, that's why we have a crime problem. But there are very specific choices that have been made since 2019 by the legislature that have incentivized or disincentivized good behavior and incentivized bad behavior. Whether it's the decriminalization of multiple hard drugs that we have seen be an absolute disaster here in Colorado, or if it's making shoplifting too easy and too appealing. All of these things go into the perception of safety.
Yeah.
And, I kind of jokingly, I watched a video the other day on social media, and it's this man going, I don't understand why women get in the driver's seat with all their bags when you can just walk around to the passenger seat and put your bags in. And I responded rather snarkily before I deleted it because I felt it was inappropriate. I was like, okay, at what point in your video do you worry about getting carjacked?
Yeah.
Do you worry about getting attacked in a parking lot? Because I don't know any woman, especially like in downtown Denver at this point, that does not have her head on a swivel when she is out and about. And that's a terrible way to be.
Absolutely. And as a mom, we were talking about earlier, we've got young adult kids. And when our daughter goes downtown to go to a concert, we're always like, you got to get there about an hour and a half ahead of time so you can park right in front of the place and not have to have an issue with who's going to come along and attack you. And those are real concerns. By the way, having slight technical difficulties. Our happy windows are gone, but we won't stop.
We're not stopping. We're going.
So here's what I want to get back to you about.
Because we do have issues.
We do
actually
have
the
issues.
Yeah.
That's okay. But the thing about being unaffiliated that I think is really interesting is if you are a constitutional conservative like myself, I'm not unaffiliated. I've thought about it because I've got some issues with the tenor and the tone of the Republican Party and how it's presenting itself. But I haven't, because I do believe the solutions are on the side of the Constitution, and that tends to be the party that is the Republican Party. But we have a real opportunity because the solutions to what are the biggest issues in Colorado are the same ones that independents care about. And it's time that we talk to people and go, when you look at it, I'm actually, by the way, as a Republican, I'm more for balance. I don't want any one party to have a totalitarian stranglehold on everything because then it's not representational. We aren't hearing from different viewpoints. And so the reality is we need to talk to people and say, hey, by the way, Colorado went from one of the safest states to now the number one most violent crime amongst the 20 most populous states. That's more than Illinois with Chicago, more than New York with New York City, under lockstep, singular governance of one party. And it's not the Republican Party. So we need to connect the dots. Higher regulation makes unaffordability. Softening on crime and all of that and lowering penalties increases crime. So it's time to connect those dots. I actually kind of think it's interesting to be in a almost post-partisan state. I love George Washington. He's tied for my three most favorite presidents. And he said the two-party system will be the death of the republic. Because at the end of the day, do we adhere to a set of principles that actually bring about human flourishing? Or do we adhere to a single party as though that's my tribe? I'm for the principles.
I too have a favorite president, but it happens to be Thomas Jefferson, another freedom lover.
Not bad.
I want to talk about tribalism just for a moment in the context of what we're seeing in Minneapolis. We're seeing tremendous sort of tribalism, not just in Minneapolis, but around the country.
Yes.
We've talked about the political divide that's going on right now, but it came to a head in Minneapolis with the death of Renee Good. And I mentioned her earlier in the show. This has been a tragic, tragic situation. I wish Renee Good was not dead. I wish that she and her partner had not made choices that put her in danger. I wish that the ICE agent did not feel like his life was in danger. I wish the entire episode had not happened. But if you want to see examples of tribalism,
yes,
you need look no further than the people who have determined that not only are they going to interrupt ICE operations, they've determined that their team is morally superior. And that's exactly what we're talking about here.
It is 100%. And I agree. I think it's a real tragedy because she actually believed and bought into what she was being told, that this was the righteous thing to do, to actually drive your car in. And I just want to make one point here before we go any further. That ICE agent had internal bleeding. He was hit by the car, and they are trained to do that. But we're in a place now where different sides feel like they have such moral superiority that they can go above the law. Let's be honest, he's a law enforcement agent. But the one that really got me was this kind of, and there's self-righteousness on both sides of the extreme fringes. Let's be really honest about this. But when they stormed into a church on Sunday morning, completely conflating what free speech is, I want to say I participated in numerous rallies, numerous opportunities between the Supreme Court steps and walking down the National Mall to our state capitol in front of our school board building. But you have to understand that to have order in this culture, there are guidelines of what's appropriate and what isn't. That is actually property. It was against the law for them to go into it. They could have been out front. They could have made their voices heard. And ironically, the two leaders of the organization are being arrested under something called the FACE Act. And what's ironic about that? The FACE Act was put in place to stop those who wanted to be standing in front of an abortion clinic and making their views heard or praying or whatever. And it has been adhered to very strictly around the country. And there is a part of that also says you also cannot interrupt religious services. And I think the thing that made me so sad about this is if you want to make your point, you don't have to go into it by interrupting a religious service. It doesn't matter what religion is. There were children in there that parents have talked about afterwards were terrified of what was going on. They interrupted it, and it was a non-political church. It is getting to the point where we're rending asunder the very fabric of what it means to make your voice heard, but do it in a way that respects the rights of others, respects the law, and productively get your point across.
One of the most interesting things for me over this last week is to listen to all of these brand new constitutional scholars talking about how we have a right to protest. What we have is the right to peaceably assemble. That is the word that's used in the Constitution, peaceably assemble. As a talk show host, I've been accused over the years so many times when I hang up on a caller or I don't respond to an email or I don't read a text on the air, I'm told I'm violating their First Amendment rights. But the reality is only the government can violate your First Amendment rights. And people in that church, which is private property, had an expectation that if you wanted to protest, to Deb's point, keep it outside.
Yeah.
I'm big on asking about the effectiveness of any sort of protest, right? I mean, you think about what is going to move the needle in public opinion, what is going to sway people to wanting to feel the same way that you feel. I've got two examples out of Minneapolis that are the worst possible things to do. Interrupting a house of worship where little children were, that's number one.
Yes.
And that to me seems beyond the pale. If we as Christians decided to protest by busting into a mosque or a Jewish temple or any other form of religion, you would be appalled, and rightfully so. People have the right in the First Amendment to pursue their religious freedom.
Well, and one of the things I think is important too is they weren't even trying to engage in dialogue. I mean, Don Lemon was there and he started criticizing, oh, well, they're not trying, the churchgoers aren't, maybe they should talk to him, maybe the pastor should talk to him. The people who violated their service came in, were yelling, were chanting, were not in any way interested in any kind of a dialogue. And if you really had an issue, then set up a meeting and discuss. I think that's the point. I think this was a media opportunity, certainly was for Don Lemon, who's no longer even on broadcast television or cable television. And it's to get attention and to look self-righteous. And then they started judging it and afterwards saying, oh, it was a white supremacist church. That church was diverse in viewpoint in every other way. But the point is, I agree with you completely. What are you trying to accomplish? Yeah. Are you actually trying to persuade people or pummel people over the head and show that you are more self-righteous than others? And there are places that should not be politicized. We politicize everything now and let people worship. I agree. We would not walk into a synagogue, a mosque, or any other place. Let them worship and then find a way to have a conversation. If you really need to, stand outside on the pavement, which is public property, not private property.
And then we get to most useless protest number 2 and 3.
Silly.
So this one, I burst out laughing. I'm not going to lie. So I'm scrolling through X as I'm prone to do, and I see a video, and it's a video of a line of people at a Target store. Everybody knows what a Target store looks like. And this long line of people, and they're all standing there with their carts, and they all have a container of Morton salt. Apparently, Target has not hired armed guards to keep the ICE agents from using their bathrooms during the day.
Oh my gosh.
Wait, it gets
Storm
better.
the gates with a pitchfork.
Yeah. And they won't block ICE from parking in their parking lots, so they can kind of stage there before they go on some sort of, activity. So Target is now being targeted. This is their protest. They all went in, they bought a carton of Morton salt, and then they stood in line to return it. Nothing says powerful protest more than harassing hourly employees at Target.
I'm still trying to figure out the connection between Morton salt and ICE agents.
Ice melts salt, Deborah.
Wow.
Get it?
So
symbolism.
And that's so powerful. And it really has changed
but
the dialogue.
You've got to watch the video of these people. First of all, they're old white women, all of them, every single one. They are all looking quite smug. And I'm making fun because if you're going to protest, make it matter. Make it make sense. Protest the right people. Protest the people that can actually affect change. If you think corporate Target needs to do something, protest outside corporate Target. Don't hassle these poor kids making minimum wage working at Target.
Having to return about 75 things of salt. I mean, this is like a high school student summer job, or, well, not summer anymore, but side job.
Yeah, I mean, it was so futile. And there's really powerful ways to make a statement. We've seen peaceful marches. I was part of the Tea Party movement back in 2008 and 2009, and I will be the first to admit, do you know what the Tea Party's really accomplished? They made us feel better.
Yeah.
Right? They made us feel better. They really did kind of rally us around, but were they effective? Maybe not in actual legislation, but they got people elected.
Yes.
We elected Tea Party candidates based on all of those initial things. The Women's March, the exact opposite of that. What has it accomplished? Nothing. Make it effective. Have clear demands. Have clear issues that you want addressed. Be an effective protester, not just an annoying idiot who is just causing problems for kids at Target.
I 100% agree. Two things come to mind. When I was talking during the Women's March and I was asking some people that were going, I'm like, can you outline to me one thing you don't have that you want? And the final thing that came up was, well, I want free birth control. I'm like, versus paying $14 at Target. That's really what you're marching over. Because I'm like, can you look at the fact that we as women are living more freely than at any other period in any other country in the entire world? And all that energy, the thing that really gets me, I love that passion. I love that energy. Can you imagine if people use that energy to say, oh, I'm sorry, where women are getting stoned in Iran because they're burqa slips or because they are sexually assaulted and it's their fault? How about you use it for that? There are real injustices. But when I see some of these marches lately or these events, and I'm like, what's with the inflatables? We never wore inflatables in front of the Supreme Court steps. I don't quite get that.
Be effective.
Yes.
Protest.
Yes,
Vent your spleen.
indeed.
Don't break windows. Don't cause problems. Have your voice heard, but do it in a way that's going to work and that you're not just going to create social media content.
I know.
That's what that felt. I was
silly.
like, oh, look, the older women want to create social media content.
I know. And by the way, it was a very comfortable one. They just stood at their carts indoors
what they
in
would
Minneapolis,
do anyway.
talking to one another, shopping.
Chatting.
Okay.
Fight the power. Anyway.
I'm wondering if we should, let's go ahead and move this one to We've Got Stuff.
I got to tell you, because it all kind of dovetails together.
It does. So our We've Got Stuff is a little different this time because we want to talk to you ladies. Men, if you're watching, you're smart because you're going to learn a little bit more how women think. But we're going to talk about something that you uncovered that is really quite fascinating.
Woo, did I go down a rabbit hole on this? So I saw a comment the other day online, and it was a comment about George Orwell in 1984, referencing that women tend to vote for the state. Well, I'm like, okay, George. I'm not, I love George Orwell, but he doesn't write women great. It was just a different era when he wrote. They're all very flat, one-dimensional characters. That's my review. But anyway, I started digging and I started looking at political voting differences between men and women, and if there was patterns that were easily identifiable. So I start digging into all of these studies and all of this research, and I found something fascinating. All of the modern research, and from modern, I say from 1980 on, starts from the premise that the only reason men and women have different voting patterns is because of social pressures, the way we're socialized, the way we're brought up, social structures, social restrictions. And I got to tell you, I have long said, and I tell my daughter this all the time, fundamentally, we are human animals, right? We have biological urges that are different for men and women. Men are focused on procreating so their progeny goes on. Women are biologically programmed to be worried about taking care of offspring. They're more risk averse. They're less likely to be entrepreneurs because of that risk aversion. And they're much more likely to think about things like long-term security. Men, on the other hand, they're ready to go. They have higher levels of testosterone and aggression. They're much more likely to take a really big risk or jump into a big challenge or do a hard and dangerous job than women are because they're wired to get a mate. And there's nothing more attractive than a successful man who can carry himself in a strong way. I'm not saying this applies to every single person in the world, but those are our biological underpinnings. And it's rational and logical to think about it in the way that those biological underpinnings do push us in certain directions. Women are still more concerned about security. When you look at the areas of gender differences in voting, the areas that are most significant, where the split is the biggest between men and women, usually have to do with issues of security. Women are much more likely to vote for gun control. Women are much more likely to vote for social safety nets because they know if they're a mother of a child, they've got to take care of that kid. And if the father decides not to participate, they're going to turn to the state, which is a whole other thing.
Yes.
But when you look at it from that perspective, you begin to understand why women tend to vote for big government, because they believe that big government can provide security. But the irony here is that over the last 50 years, women have been told that a relationship with a man is some kind of chattel slavery situation, when in reality, they're much more likely to be able to have a solid, wonderful relationship with a man than they are relying on the government, where they're sort of at the whims of other people that don't care about them.
Yeah, it's not a long-term way of thinking about it. And we're going to be daring here. We're going to actually go back to the days of men are from Mars, women are from Venus. I think we women understand there are real differences. By the way, whether you look at the biology of our brains are even wired differently. Women's synapses go this way more, men go this way more, which allows us to like, oh, I'm taking care of the baby. Whoa, there's a stove. Okay, I got to send an email. You know, we go in and out, and it's the truth. And when we deny truth, things get really lost. I also think what's interesting is when you're talking, Mandy, about how the modern things are saying, oh, it's just the way we're raised. I could have bought that in the 50s when women were allowed 3 jobs: nurse, secretary, teacher.
Yeah.
That's not today. Today, we can do all kinds of things. I could run for Congress. You can have a radio show. I could have a radio show. We can do all of these. I can produce movies and sit on boards. I'm not driven by feeling like I'm put down. And what really used to bother me was, even today, it's like they haven't moved on. People would say, oh, I vote Republican because my husband tells me to. No, actually, he voted differently before we got married, and then he saw the light of constitutional principles. So it's not what they're saying. But what I think is really interesting is who presses into this the most? Those who want bigger government. Let's all take ourselves back to the Obama administration. I'll never forget when they had an entire cartoon series of this fictional woman named Julia. Now, Julia, I know, so sorry, Julia. Sorry, this date is not warm and fuzzy. But Julia, they led her through her life of all the times that the government was there for her. Never saw a man, but the government was there for her when she was just starting out and needed assistance. The government was there for her when she had her baby and she needed them to provide all of her health care. The government was there for her later in life. It is a flat out lie. And what's interesting is when we think more from a strategic and an actual analytical viewpoint, women, if we want safety and security, I'm a proud gun owner. I was faced by a stalker who was way taller than me, and I was not able to defend myself because I lived in a state at the time that wouldn't allow me to carry. I want to protect myself, but when we look at the policies that actually do it, and what happens when the state takes control, inevitably it takes control of your life, which is not the same as taking care of you. It begins to dictate everything, and it's just trading, like you said. If you want to call, the masculine patriarchy, well, you know it's even worse? Having been in the Soviet Union and East Germany, the government control and tyranny. That's far worse.
And I think that most people, I mean, I would hope anyway, I know that there's people who don't believe government has any role with anything, but we as a society over the last 120 years have decided social safety nets are important. We don't want people to be on the streets. We don't want mothers with little babies to starve and not be able to feed their children. But what I'd love to see is a return to how can we provide for what we need to provide for without sort of trapping people in the welfare system where they can't get out. The welfare cliff is a real thing.
It is.
And I think that too many people look at the potential upside of larger government intervention with never considering the downside. And this is one of those topics that I got my first radio show, my show, in 2005. And I have talked about trying to fix welfare reform since 2005. I don't mean end it. What I mean is we have to let those young moms who need the system, who have babies, we need to let them climb out of it so they can be free, isn't it? I mean, it's a matter of freedom, but it's also a matter of self-sufficiency. It's also a matter of standing with your kids and your family on your own 2 feet. What we've done is bust up families by telling fathers they don't matter and that they shouldn't be a part of their lives in order to get the financial aid that they may need at that moment. And instead of busting up families, we should be trying to figure out ways to keep families together to help them succeed and move forward. There's just so many things that we've just gotten so far away from what we know to be true. You know, everybody likes to talk about your facts, my facts, everybody's facts. But study after study after study after study has shown kids who grow up in a family with their mom and dad in the house have far, far lower levels of poverty, of drug addiction, of only, dropping out of high school. I mean, it's like there's so many positives. It's not a mystery. So why are we still allowing ourselves to be told that marriage and relationships are some kind of penalty? I don't get it. I don't understand it. And yet today, I see on Twitter a woman who says, I've been dating a guy for a couple months. He's super great. He's kind to me. I really, really like him. But I just found out he was a conservative, so I have to break up with him. And I'm like, do you just want to die alone? I mean, is that what you want? I don't know. Maybe they want us all to not be happy so we'll be easier and more malleable to control. I don't know.
Yeah, or be angry and then weaponize and turn that anger. One of the other things that's interesting is we're just talking about there are actually differences between the biological sexes and how we look at issues and all of that. I do believe for the most part, obviously what I love about womanhood is it's a very broad spectrum. You know, I grew up as a total tomboy, probably would have been told that I was actually transgender if I was a kid today. But the reality is even within that, women do have a more nurturing nature. We want to help people. We are compassionate. But it's time that we all recognize when that is getting weaponized because it's an immediate knee-jerk emotional response. Oh, this poor person is dealing with this issue. Well, we're going to come in and we as the government are going to take care of it. That might not lead to the long-term flourishing and actually solve the problem. The other difference that we see, by the way, is when women are married and have kids or just become moms, they become far more conservative. And the reason why is because that nurturing now becomes much closer to home and you see it in a generational way. You're like, oh, well, if we keep going with the debt the way it is, just spending it like crazy, that's going to burden my children. I care about the safety within my home. And there's an interesting theory that when women don't have children, a lot of that kind of nurturing compassion gets turned towards issues and more abstract ideas and people groups and all of that. And I think that's really true. That is one of the biggest differences I see because it's interesting. Margaret Thatcher, who got to be, by the way, both the Iron Lady and a wife and a mom, she said, you become conservative when you have something to conserve. When you realize that you've got kids at home and you can't pay the bills and the energy prices are too high, you begin to see things in a different manner. And I think it's time that we connect the dots, not just when our first emotions come forward, which is great, that's an impetus, but then look at what actually solves the problem.
And part of why we're having this conversation is how you get your news.
Yes.
Let's go ahead and this is one of my near and dear topics to me.
Yes.
Because I work in radio and I like to think that we give out great information 3 hours a day, Monday through Friday. But the reality is that most people are only getting snippets of news stories and they're getting them in a very siloed way. One of the things I despise about social media is that once social media starts to pick up your patterns, what do you linger on longer?
Yeah.
And sometimes it can be as brief as a second, right? They're creating an algorithm giving you the things that you want to hear. They're going to give you the stories that affirm biases that maybe you showed according to the algorithm that you're not even aware of. It has done more damage to, I think, our ability to have discussions, because it used to be we would watch the news, you'd watch Walter Cronkite back in the 1900s, kids. We'd watch Walter Cronkite and we would all see the same story. So maybe we had a different opinion about the solutions, but we were all working from the same framework. Now, you may not even be seeing the news that Deborah and I are seeing.
Yep.
You may not even see the same stories. And if you do see the same stories, they may be presented in a completely different way. So your impression of what happened is completely different from my impression of what happened. So now we're not even operating from the same set of facts.
100%. And I remember long ago, before I had temporary insanity and left Colorado to be an actress, that was not very smart. I was actually working in one of the local news stations, and they were actually kind of grooming me to be an on-air person. And it was one of the last times that there were two amazing legends, broadcast journalists who knew their stories, wrote their stories, just told the facts, and then allowed people to make their own decision. And it has changed since then completely. People coming out of journalism school are now taught they have a mission to help the unwashed masses get to the right conclusion. But when you also look at the fact that a lot of people get their news from late night talk show hosts or from daytime talk shows, that's not news. That's punditry, usually from one side. And that is a problem. And this struck home with me when during the LA riots, when they were going on, whether you were for that issue, against that issue, with ICE being there or not, everybody, if you look at the facts, there were riots going on. There's a woman I know that we used to be friends. We're not anymore, that great divide of politics. And she put on Facebook that, please know I'm here in LA and there are no riots. Not just it isn't bad or they're right. There are no riots. And she said, I even looked out my window and I walked out my door and there are no riots. Well, by the way, she lived in Bel Air, which is one of the most wealthy areas. She was not anywhere near downtown. And I simply put on her page an article from the LA Times, hardly conservative, quoting the police chief, saying that he and his officers were being, pelted with Molotov cocktails and all of this. I put that on there and I said, is this not true? And she never responded. And I thought to myself, how do we proceed in having any civil dialogue if we can't even agree on the facts? And, Mandy, I want to hear where you get your information from, but I started about 15 years ago when I started doing radio. I get alerts from all kinds of publications because I want to see who's covering what, who's not covering it. Am I getting the full story? Is there more over here? So I get it from things on the far left, on the far right, and ones right down the middle that I think will give me the facts. And it's amazing. I think if more people did that instead of a singular source or a well-curated feed that is just coming because it reinforces your confirmation bias that you already have. So, where do you get your information?
Well, today on my blog, yesterday on my blog, I had stories from CNN. I had a story from Fox News. I had a story from News Nation. I had a story from USA Today. I had a story from the Washington Post. I had a story. I go everywhere, mostly because not everybody covers the same thing, and I don't want to do all politics. So I'm also looking for interesting stories about health and science and stuff like that. But it's one of the things that I guess I have to appreciate. My listeners sometimes use me as Google, right? They'll send me a story and say, Mandy, is this true? And I appreciate it because they're making the effort.
Yes.
And I always respond. I'll do a quick Google search and then I will respond with how I Googled, like the question that I asked, give me another perspective on this story. And then you can find an alternative story and then sort of cross-check.
Yes.
And I always send back, thank you for asking, but here's how to do it in the future because I don't have time to be everybody's Google. But you do have to look across multiple sources. And I got to tell you, there's some left-wing outlets that drive me crazy. The Nation. The Nation has been around for forever, and they have really smart-sounding people drawing really dumb conclusions. But I make myself look at The Nation.
Yes.
Because you have to understand what the other side is seeing, talking about, and where they're getting their stories before you can even begin to have a conversation about, and let me just say one thing. There are people out there listening, yeah, I can do that, but what about the other side? What about the other guy? You can't control anybody else. You can't demand, you can't stomp your feet, you can't paper someone with articles that is gonna make them see things in a different way. And the faster you decide to let all that go, the happier you will be.
Yeah.
The only thing I can say is being incredibly well-informed and talking to people that have questions or misconceptions, I will always come in and say, hey, that's not consistent with what I've read recently. I read this in this outlet, just something to check out if you have time. That is how I leave it, and then it's on them. You have to stop worrying about what everybody else is doing.
And I think one of the things that you can do too, because I've been in the middle of these conversations where people are talking over me, like entire family reunions, and I would say to them, I just stop and I'd say, I have a question. If you were wrong, would you want to know? Because that's really it. Are people actually open to it? Because in my life, I've examined everything from my own faith. I read things from all over different aspects, from what I read, what I look at. I've come to the conclusion on my faith as a Christian and my love of the Constitution because I've held it up and I've really looked at it. And if you really believe in things, it can stand a little bit of analysis. I would also say this, I'm sure that in your busy life, it's probably like, oh my gosh, I don't have time to do that. But I do think we're at the day and age where to maintain this amazing republic that we have inherited, where particularly as women, we live in a way that people have dreamed of and never even thought would ever be possible, this kind of freedom that we have. That takes being a 24/7 citizen. That takes actually being informed. You don't have to, I don't watch TV really because I don't want everybody else's emotions. Yeah. I don't want their take on it. I read everything. I read things from Washington Post to Washington Examiner, CNN to Fox. And then I love things like Epic Times that was founded by people that escaped communism and are just giving the facts. I would encourage, don't get your information from late night television or from women's talk shows, except for this one.
Yeah, we're good. The rest of them are horrible. Yeah. We are amazing. Okay, we're going to tell you what it is.
But it's time to do that. And it's time to, while you don't want to beat your head against a wall, but if you ask people that question, if you were wrong, would you want to know? And they say no, then you're like, okay, just moving right along.
Well, I do want to sort of wrap up this whole thing. I just saw a snippet online of a young woman who had participated in the pro-Palestinian protests in Los Angeles. No, she was in San Francisco. And she was at college somewhere, and she decided, she was told by the protest organizers, the pro-Palestinian protest organizers, that October 7th was no big deal, nothing really happened, they killed some soldiers, whatever. Well, she went down to Los Angeles to see the Nova Music Festival display, the traveling exhibit. She had no idea they murdered a bunch of young people who were just at a music festival.
Yes.
She had no idea what really happened. She had no idea that Hamas had live streamed it. She had no idea that any of this existed until she saw it with her own eyes.
Yeah.
And she said at that moment, what else are they lying to her about? If you are only in your silo, if you're only in your bubble, think about the fact that this young woman missed the fact that murders, rapes, beheadings were live streamed by the people that she was supporting. And she had no idea.
Yeah. And that's one thing I want to conclude with before we go to the good news, because there's good news. James Madison said to this effect, it's not his exact wording, but he said, never give up your common sense. Never give up your ability to reason for yourself. And the flip side of that is George Orwell making a circular thing here where he said the party, whether this is the state, whether it's the people that are trying to persuade you of only one viewpoint, this is what he's referring to. They said, ignore the evidence of your eyes and your ears. It's their final, most essential command. Time to think for ourselves.
Yep.
That's what 2026 is.
And you know what? Maybe you think for yourself and you end up with a different conclusion than we have.
That's okay.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Just think. Just think.
Okay.
Anyway.
Okay. I'm thinking now about good news. We've got good news.
So Deborah and I had a big adventure. And as soon as I can complete, I told Deborah, I'm making a video of our field trip to the Broncos game last Sunday.
Should we try this?
Yes.
Oh,
we
did
bad.
it. Oh, we did it. That was really good.
So we went to the Bills game and had the most amazing time.
So much fun.
And my voice is still trash.
Yeah, me too.
5 days later. But congratulations to the Denver Broncos. It was a David Copperfield kind of victory. It was the best of times. You beat the Bills in overtime. It was the worst of times. Bo Nix is out for the season.
Yes.
But it was such a great day, and can't wait for the AFC Championship. But it was a great week for football because the Indiana University team won the national championship.
So before we get to Indiana, because we have to get to that, I have to say, you know what was so wonderful about the game? First of all, it was electric being there in person, so thank you for the invitation.
51.5 million people watched that game.
Oh my gosh, we were exhausted by the end. I hate saying that when we were on the field and there's actually athletes that are running, but we were exhausted. But you know what was the best part about it? It was what sports is meant to be. There were over 70-some thousand people cheering, banging their feet, yelling. I lost my voice for a couple of days. Poor Mandy had to go right back on the air. But when we were there and everybody was walking out together in community, were
chanting,
people, chanting,
high-fiving,
cheering, all this kinds of, there was a few really sad Bills fans, but the rest of us were like this. And I looked at Mandy and I said, I have no idea who's a Democrat here, who's a Republican, who believes this, who believes that. It doesn't matter, because this is what it means to have a society and have things that unite us. It used to be sporting events, entertainment, things like that, community stuff unites us. And that was the best thing of all of it. Such a blast.
It was
so
amazing.
Okay, so the Indiana Hoosiers.
And neither of us are Hoosiers, but I got to tell you, this is like the feel-good sports story of the year. If you're not familiar, Indiana University's Hoosier football team has pretty much been terrible for a really long time.
The most losingest, that is actually a term, the losingest team.
Terrible, but they got this young quarterback. They got this dynamic coach who always looks angry. And you talk about a football game that was an absolute grudge fest. But Indiana, the quarterback at one point throws himself over the field goal or over the goal line after fighting off attackers. It was just, I love football. I love sports. Congratulations to the Indiana Hoosiers.
And you know what I want to say about what I think is so awesome is it reminds me of the movie Miracle, if you haven't seen it, about the... Again.
It's my favorite sports movie of all time.
Oh my gosh. It was obviously, it was the Olympics when the U.S. hockey team beat the Soviets, and they were told it was impossible. And what was done differently was there was no individual stars on that team. Same thing on this team. There was not one 5-star recruit. Our son plays football in college, so I understand what that means. Not one 5-star recruit. They're known as the most disciplined team. They are the underdog Cinderella story. And one of the things I love is the coach, Curt Cignetti, there are memes of his face. He's always just serious. He finally smiled at the end and goes like he thinks he's going to have a beer, which I think he's earned. But he said, I care about the character of the players. He said, I'm old school. When I'm recruiting, I look at the players' grades and their attendance, and I look at whether or not someone has ever taught them right and wrong. He could take young men like that, do something that was unthinkable in 2 years. And then many of us know Fernando Mendoza, who is a Heisman Trophy winner, passed over by his home team of Miami. Yep. He ends up getting the Heisman Trophy, wins in Miami, beating that team, and a man of faith, character, and I got to say as a woman, his honoring his mom who deals with MS brought tears to my eyes. And she said, that his mom is his hero, and if she could fight what she fights every single day, sorry, I'm going to get choked up, that he could do the same thing. And I do think it was a great week.
Phenomenal.
Of what sports are supposed to be. And I say that, by the way, even though I'm married to a Buckeye, I am a Buckeye, and they beat the Buckeyes. But yay for Indiana. That was really good.
Okay, on to our random acts of kindness. I have a mission for you guys. A friend of mine does this all the time in another city. He considers himself a sticky note ninja. And what he does is he has like a little pad of sticky notes with him all the time. And the only reason I know he does this is because I've seen him do it. And whenever he sees someone or sees something where he could leave a little sticky note, like, I hope you have a great day, or you look, those pants look great on you, or whatever it is, not something that personal.
Yeah, don't get weird with it.
He leaves it at work. I don't think his coworkers know it's him.
Oh, that's
But there are like
awesome.
little positive, uplifting things. So be a sticky note warrior this week and compliment people that you don't know, or that you do know, or that you work with, or yourself. I don't care.
There you go. If I had a sticky note, I'd go, Mandy, that sweater looks awesome on you.
Thank you.
I love it. That's kind of like one of mine. I've got two. I'm going to make them quick. So our church starts off the new year with a long period where we pray every day for people that are in need, and they send in cards. And so I've been doing that for 21 days. And when you read some of those things, it really breaks your heart and puts everything in perspective. You may think, oh, I've had a bad day because of this, but there's someone who's dealing with cancer of a small child or whatever. And so do pray. There's a lot of joke about, I do believe there is real power in it, and it transforms you as well as lifting someone up for God's blessing and healing. But the other thing kind of falls in line with the sticky note. I saw this mom the other day struggling, and she was so embarrassed, and she was looking around. And I remember the first time I took our daughter into a Starbucks, she started crying, and I just turned around and left again and thought, I'm not prepared to be in civilization because I'm so bad. And I read this, I thought, this is it. If you see a mom struggling, just give her a compliment. Say, you're doing great. You're doing awesome. Your kids are blessed to have you. And you will have, or put a sticky note on her back that says it.
Great job,
Okay,
Mom.
there we go. That's the good news and the act of kindness.
Don't forget to subscribe. You can hit that button below, but also watch all the great shows that are on IITV, as well as following us on our Facebook page, Mandy and
Ampersand.
Deb. Ampersand Deb.
Yes.
And we'll see you next time.
Yeah, take care.